let me get into a bit more detail about how we deal with it in cybersecurity. If you look at how an organization has to think about cybersecurity risk, and how does an organization understand what is their risk exposure? This slide talks about that. We help organizations deal with it in multiple ways. So this is a mechanism where we go to a customer of ours, we do a assessment using a number of tools which will assess that organization on a number of different factors, which are given below. In terms of how strong is that particular organization from a compliance perspective? Are there any malware already existing? In terms of DNS, is the DNS securely configured? Are there any open ports which are there? I'll go into detail of some of these items in the next few slides. We check for domain strength. We check for availability, high availability. Is there any information which is already leaked from this particular organization? There are a number of different portals out there which have leaked information. For instance, a particular organization CEO email ID could be leaked, a phone number could be leaked, or some sensitive emails could be leaked and put on the dark web. So we check, we see if any information leakage has already happened. We check for the domain reputation. How secure is the domain? Is the domain, there are a number of different ways to check whether a domain is secure or not. So we do a outside-in assessment. What I mean by outside in here is all we need to know is the URL of the company. Just based on the URL, the website URL of the company, we can find out all of these different items for that particular organization. So we do this assessment based on a number of tools, and then we look at, we give a specific questionnaire to that organization, right? I'll walk you through some of the questions that we ask, right? Based on the outside-in assessment and the questionnaire, we arrive at a risk score for that company. So here we have some examples of the kind of questions that we ask to understand a company's security risk posture. So some of them are basic details, like how many employees work in the company, how many user accounts are there, how many endpoints are there. What I mean by an endpoint, endpoints are how many laptops, how many desktops, how many mobiles, how many servers. Each of them is one endpoint. So how many endpoints are there? What is the primary business of the company, right? So why do we need to understand the business? Because depending on the nature of the business of the company, the exposure to digital assets would be higher. For example, if it's an e-commerce company, an e-commerce company is heavily reliant on the internet. If an e-commerce company website goes down, their overall business goes down, right? But if it's say a brick and mortar company, which is not doing a lot of business online, then the risks are different. The website is still important, but not as important as for an e-commerce company. So depending on the nature of business and depending on the type of digital exposure a company has, the risk will vary. Some of the questions here are also technical in nature, which our consultants go and help the organization fill it up. For instance, the things like, say, let me focus on this question, the role-based access control. So have you properly documented and regulated which users require access to which systems, data, and other services, following the principle of least privilege? What do I mean by this? If you take the example of a company can have a HR department, it can have finance department, it can have IT department. and you can there will be information about an employee's date of birth, employee's address, employee's salary, when the person has joined, the nomination. So there will be a number of details of an employee which the HR department will be storing. This data is useful for the HR department, but the same data the IT department doesn't need to know. The IT department only needs to know the name of the person and the user ID, and at most the contact detail, maybe the phone number. The IT department doesn't need to know the date of birth of the employee. It doesn't need to know the address of the employee. It doesn't need to know any other personal information about the employee. The finance department needs to know the salary of the employee, but it doesn't need to necessarily know other details. So depending on which user should have what access and what level of access, has that been properly configured? That's an important item to take a note of. Another example here which I can give is even within the finance department, an employee of the finance department might have access to actually enter values or modify data of say the salary data of an employee, but that finance team member should not have the permissions to delete the employee data, or even if the data has to be modified, it has to go through the proper approval so that the manager is approving any change. So these kind of access controls, who can read the data, who can modify the data, who can delete the data, right? All of these should be properly set within an organization to ensure that the right access control is provided and the right security checks are in place for an organization. So there are a number of questions like these. I've just touched upon one of them. There are a number of such questions which are important to consider when understanding the security risk posture of an organization. So as part of our work, what we do is we go through a set of questions like this with a company. We work with the company to help them give the correct answers. And based on the responses that we get, we arrive at the risk score. So this slide talks about a sample report. So this is an actual example. Again, remove the customer name for confidentiality, right? So let me go through the different elements that we have here. We give an overall risk rating out of a score of 100. We arrive at a particular risk score. Then we have the risk scoring for each of the different elements within which contribute to this overall rating. Let's talk about asset visibility, right? I'll go through a few items here so that it'll help you understand what all are we covering here. Asset visibility. One of the real important things that need to be understood in cybersecurity to be able to secure your organization is to know what all assets you have in the organization. How many laptops are there? How many desktops are there? How many mobiles are there? How many servers are there? How much data do we have in the cloud? How many Wi-Fi points do we have? How many switches are there? And there should be a visibility of all the assets. Unless there is proper visibility, you cannot, an organization can never secure itself. If you don't know what is there within your system, you can obviously, don't know the risk associated with it. So one of the first important things to secure an organization is to ensure that you know what all is part of your organization. Then how are we actually protecting it now? What kind of antivirus? What are the existing security controls? Do you have the right firewall? Do you have the right endpoint security? Do you have the right mobile security solutions? Do you have proper network segmentation in place? Do you have the cloud security in place? So we check for all that. We check what our security controls are there. We check for identity and access management. Is there Active Directory in place? Are the users correctly assigned their roles? Do the set in the example that I gave, does the finance team members have access to only those finance related resources? Does the IT team only have the access to the IT team resources? So you check for all that in identity and access management. The other big element of it is disaster recovery and business continuity planning. So in spite of all the things that you could do, there could still be disasters. There could be man-made and natural disasters. How are you positioned to recover? Suppose there is a huge flood or there's a huge fire in a particular site. Do you have the right mechanisms in place to recover from that disaster? What kind of policies do you have in place to ensure business continuity? Right? Which is also ties in with the backup and restore. Do you have proper mechanisms in place to back up your critical data? And are you ensuring that you're restoring them on a regular basis to make sure that the restore mechanisms work correctly, the restored files and the images work correctly? So we look at all of these different elements and then arrive at the big score, the risk rating. The other important element of our assessment report is providing this understanding of what is the risk exposure from a quantified, from a rupee perspective. So this is a particular framework we'll cover later in this workshop. So what we provide to our customers is we'll tell them that what is the most likely impact you have based on the business that you as an organization have, the controls, security controls that are in place, the kind of digital assets that are public facing, what is the most likely impact? And what is the minimum impact and what's the maximum impact, right? Possible for your organization. So we provide this number, which is a big input in terms of arriving at what is the kind of insurance coverage that a company should be looking at. So this talks about the report. So this is a high level. I'll get into details in these slides. So the kind of recommendations, once we do as assessment, we go to our customers with specific recommendations as to what needs to be done. So in this case, the recommendations come in different categories: critical, priority, high priority, and medium priority. Critical priority items are those which absolutely have to be immediately addressed. They are very, very important to make sure that as an organization you are secure, that these need to be addressed immediately. Then, for instance, here implementing an EDR. EDR is endpoint detection and response, which means having the right antivirus, anti-malware solution for all the endpoints. That is very critical. That was identified as one of the very critical items for this customer. Implementing a security operations center, ensuring that intrusion prevention systems are configured in the firewall. Again, these get a bit more technical, so I'll not get into the detail, but to give you a view of how the recommendations come in, and the kind of recommendations we provide are very actionable recommendations, which lead to a very specific activity that that company has to perform. And we also give detail about why it is important. It's not just about giving a recommendation. We explain why that recommendation is important, and by not implementing this, what is the risk that the company is continuing to expose itself to. Right? So here we talked about the EDR solution, and then in this slide I have a couple more points around a firewall. So in this particular for this particular company, there was a firewall. So a firewall, so they got the basic thing right, but the firewall was not being used properly. A firewall has a number of features, and some of the important features like intrusion prevention was not turned on. The segmentation of assets was not done. So this is one challenge we see which organization need to take care of. You might buy the right tools, right things, but if you don't use your products effectively, it still doesn't give you the right protection.